Signore e signori, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? After this well-deserved coffee break, I don't know, I hope the coffee was good enough for Roman standards, which is not easy, but maybe people coming from Brussels will forgive us. Besides that, we start again, and we have now, before the second panel, a special intervention by the ambassador of Italy to the North Atlantic Council, our friend Marco Peronaci. So Marco, please, if you can speak here or there, as you prefer. It's your choice. And you have 10 minutes. You go there. Okay.
Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, the engine and the brain of the NATO Defense College Foundation that has brought us together here for this very exciting and interesting conversation. Thanks to the other briefers that I listened to with great attention. Thanks to the House that is hosting us. That I'm among friends is clear from one essential evidence. My intervention was scheduled not before but after the coffee break. And so I'm grateful for that also. But joke aside, I'm very pleased to be here to give my perspective on the role of NATO after the Vilnius summit. A role that is key today for the safety of our citizens and for the protection of our democracy. As Deputy Prime Minister Tajani has underlined in many of his speeches, NATO has always been and remains, even more today, a firm point of reference for Italy's international action as it represents the foundation of our security and of our freedom, which, as the events of 24th of February demonstrate, we cannot ever take for granted. In my talk today, I will mention and will share some ideas about the Vilnius summit and the Ukraine, about the NATO and the southern flank. And I will also touch briefly on resilience, defense industry innovation, and cooperation with the European Union. These are all issues that have been touched by the other speakers. So, in Vilnius last July, the Alliance proved once more its unity and resolution in ensuring our collective defense from all threats based on a 360-degree approach. Together with our new ally, Finland, we renewed our unconditional support for Ukraine and condemned Russia's unjustifiable aggression. We reiterated commitment to fight terrorism in all its form. We worked together to address the systemic challenge posed by China to Euro-Atlantic security. We decided to strengthen our defense and deterrence posture as well as our resilience in the face of growing hybrids and cyber threats. Finally, and most pertinently in the Italian perspective, NATO leaders committed the alliance to look more carefully at its southern flank to enhance engagement with our southern neighborhood and partners by the time of the next Washington summit in July next year. Of course, the support to Ukraine is and is bound to remain the priority for the security of the alliance. Our challenge is nowadays twofold. The first, we need to operationalize and fine-tune our support to Kyiv with the one provided at national and multilateral level, chiefly by the European Union. Secondly, we need to coordinate with the G7 ongoing initiative for security guarantees to ensure optimal results. Our staunch reaffirmation of the support to Ukraine is duly encapsulated in paragraph 10 of the Vilnius communiqué. The northern star of our interaction within the international community is the UN Charter, and notably its Article 51 on the inherent right of all countries to self-defense. Reaffirming the defensive character of the alliance is a point well worth emphasizing, especially today when we are confronted by pervasive hostile stratcom on the alleged expansionist and aggressive nature of NATO. The comprehensive assistance package is another pillar of our action for Kyiv. The enhanced CAP builds on and accelerates the trajectory started in the Madrid summit, when allies have committed over 500 million euros for urgent non-lethal aid to help the Ukrainian defense sector to transition towards full interoperability with NATO. In Vilnius, we also set out a new updated strategic vision regarding the overarching security architecture in Europe. Paragraph 12 of the communiqué states explicitly that the security of Ukraine is of great importance to allies and the alliance, whereby clearly postulating the indispensable value of Kyiv's position in any future European security architecture. From Bucharest 15 years ago to Vilnius, the notion that Ukraine and Georgia will be member of NATO was not only reaffirmed with the sentence, "The future of Ukraine is in NATO," it was also operationalized. In this vein, NATO established the NATO-Ukrainian Council, a new joint body where allies in Ukraine acts and sits as equal member to advance political dialogue, engagement, and cooperation. The NUC is already up and running. Its first kickoff session was in Vilnius at the highest political level with the participation of President Zelensky. The G7 security initiative set out and agreed at the margin of the Vilnius summit is conceptually and practically an essential part of our package of support to Ukraine. The declaration and the following bilateral negotiations underway embody our commitment to the strategic objective of a free, independent, democratic, and sovereign Ukraine within the internationally recognized borders, capable of defending itself and deterring future aggression. I am proud to recall that Italy was amongst the initial and most active promoters of the G7 Plus declaration. The Vilnius summit marked a further step forward in the alliance reflection towards the South. Working closely with like-minded allies and thanks to an Italian strong push at the highest political level, the leaders approved a specific mandate requesting a NATO fresh recommitment on challenges and opportunities stemming from its southern flanks, including but not limited to NATO's Mediterranean front. Indeed, there is a common arch of instability running from the northeastern boundaries of our alliance to its immediate southern neighborhood. And there is a clear symmetry of threats in both the northeastern flank and the southern one. Those threats can erupt suddenly out of the multifaceted instability situation in the MENA regions, exacerbated by external factors, including PMC presence, economic coercion by third parties, strategic dependencies, climate change, food and energy crisis. The recent series of coups in the Sahel Strip clearly proves that the disruptive dynamics are already in place. The alliance of the Sahel states signed by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali is the first of an indigenous kind of agreements to which we should pay more attention. This is why Vilnius further directed the alliance to act more effectively in the area of crisis prevention and management and of cooperative security. We should develop the image of the alliance as a friend in deeds for our partners by evolving the concept of partnership towards interactive and participative models, such as is the case of NMI mission in Iraq. A key driver for any future enhanced role of NATO in the MENA region is political engagement at appropriate level, including with regional and sub-regional organizations like the African Union, the League of Arab States, and ECOWAS. In 2024, we will have the chance to reinforce our bonds with our partners of the Mediterranean Dialogue and of the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative as we celebrate the anniversaries of their establishment. Security is a whole of society effort. The Ukrainian war is a tragic reminder of this truth. This is why another growing strand of work at NATO concerns resilience and the fight against cyber and hybrid threats. Resilience is about addressing effectively allies' potential vulnerabilities. It is something very concrete, the critical enabler for our individual and collective defense. The implications are multifold and eminently practical, ensuring continuity of government, providing essential services to the population, including energy supplies, food and water, critical infrastructure, civil support to operation, namely functional communication transport systems. In Vilnius, NATO leaders converged on the definition of a series of collective resilience objectives that each ally is now called to adopt and implement. Resilience remains a primary national prerogative, but international coordination is viewed as a fundamental enabler, including, of course, at the European Union level. Italy is very active in this area, considering how vital it is for us to protect, among others, critical undersea infrastructures in the Mediterranean. We have therefore acted swiftly to make sure that resilience becomes a truly 360-degree NATO effort from the Baltic Sea to the southern shores. Later this month, a high-level bilateral meeting with NATO will take place in Rome. We are working to build an effective framework of regular consultation and collaboration that could also serve as a best practice among allies. Initiatives like the NATO Digital Ocean Vision and Strategy under evaluation for the enhancement of the maritime situational awareness are key for the sensing and dissemination capacity of the alliance in order to achieve superiority, cognitive superiority, and effective decision-making. NATO resilience requirements should also pave the way to stronger synergy with the European Union, both in its regulatory and budget functions. Military mobility, energy, cyber infrastructures are just some examples of high potential areas of complementarities with the EU. Of course, continued dialogue and exchange with the private sector is fundamental, due to today's broad reliance on commercial actors to provide critical service. When we look at the thick existing network of pipelines, data, and energy cables crossing the Mediterranean and connecting our country to Europe and Africa and the rest of the world, we can have an immediate, vivid picture of the importance of resilience to face vulnerabilities and disruptions. No defense, no army can exist without a solid logistics and deep procurement basis. This is why innovation, defense industry, and NATO have always gone hand in hand. A plan to strengthen defense industrial basis of the alliance is under implementation. Renewed emphasis is laid on defragmentation and rationalization of the weapon system so as to boost procurement capacity. New efforts are also made to coordinate with similar EU plans to increase its defense industry in a way to maximize interoperability and complementarity. A common reflection is especially carried out on energy needs and diversification, the sustainability of the supply side, EDTs, and accessibilities of fundamental raw materials, including rare earth. In less than 2 years of fightings, weapons and ammunition transferred to Ukraine have highlighted the need for an urgent replenishment of allied stockpiles. Thus, the EU defense industry policy experienced an unprecedented acceleration. At the same time, allies are increasingly aware of the need to preserve and possibly develop our technological edge in the areas where it still exists. This is even more urgent now that we are confronted with the exponential development of artificial intelligence and quantum technologies that can have a strong impact on war-making. NATO supports technological innovation, including through the NATO Innovation Fund and the Diana Startup Accelerator. A new growth cycle of defense investment and procurement is before us. We should seize the opportunities that it offers in terms of the spillover and the sieve mill applications. It is therefore vital to strengthen NATO-EU cooperation and coordination. Italy is a firm believer in NATO and EU complementarity. NATO can establish requirements, standards, and targets for allies procurement, while the EU can regulate member states' market and the demand and supply side incentives. But we have to be honest, so far, coordination has been too limited and too slow, preserving fragmentations and tolerating inefficiency. Let me conclude by underlining something often underestimated by our domestic public debate on the defense industry. We are going through a new phase in NATO characterized by enlargement, Finland, but also Sweden, and then Ukrainian and others, a growing budget, and an overall alliance re-energization. Allies procurement, NATO tenders, and support to dual-use innovations are therefore an important opportunity for the Allied and Italian companies, as well as for our industrial base and national economy. This will be especially true if we leverage our twin membership in NATO and EU, and if we work together with other allies to build a common, stronger Euro-Atlantic industrial and technological base, which will ultimately be the decisive factor for our defense and deterrence in the 21st century. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you, Ambassador, for your explanation, for your speech. Now, the floor goes to the second panel, chaired by Flavia Giacobbe, a rising star on Italian media, and you have a very interesting menu to look at, projecting security in a new era, looking south. And I know also there is a person, Abdulaziz Sager, who will join us by Jeddah in remote because he cannot come for family reasons. So, Flavia, you have the floor.
Okay, now yes, okay. Good afternoon. Let me thank the NATO Defense College Foundation for inviting me to chair this event. Thank you, Ambassador Minuto Rizzo. I say hello to Ambassador Terzi di Sant'Agata e Peronaci. In the previous panel, we talked about defining future NATO's challenges and priorities. Now, the program of the conference features a conversation on the southern region of the alliance, an important issue that calls for both cooperative security and security projection in the global context. In this regards, the partnerships in the southern region are going to be essential. We are talking about Mediterranean dialogue and Istanbul cooperation initiative that now should be reconsidered and revamped. Moreover, the strategic importance of the Mediterranean and MENA region and in general of the South, it is something that will be central in the upcoming G7 that will be held in Italy. Italian will be next chair of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Cavodragone, further highlighting a constant commitment to this area. So, the rules of engagement of this session are the same of the previous panel. Now I introduce our panelists. Florence Gaub, Director, Research Division, NATO Defense College in Rome. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And Jan Lesser, Vice President and Executive Director, Bruxelles Office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you for your presence. Abdulaziz Sager, President, Gulf Research Center of Jeddah, that is with us remotely. Thank you for being with us, President. Okay. Aydin Kilic, Director, NATO Strategic Direction, South Hub, NATO Joint Force Command of Naples. You are most welcome. So please, I remind you to stay within 7 minutes for your speech. A timer will assist us in staying within the limits. Let's start with Florence Gaub that will talk about Mediterranean dialogue and Istanbul cooperation initiative, background and revamping the partnerships. The floor is yours.
Wow, it worked immediately.
I don't know, is it?
I think if I had to give my remarks one title, I would call it Diplomacy is Back. I think what you also heard in the previous discussion, especially in Karl-Heinz Kamp remarks, is that the region has been framed, I think, since at least the 90s, if not before, as very much in terms of capacity building on the one hand, when it comes to NATO side, so we help them be better military forces, police forces, we have a dialogue. But it's very much, I mean, I think in this spirit, NATO was more like the EU, you know, transformative engagement, so to speak. Or on the negative side, the region was seen as an exporter of instability, especially Iraq, but also, of course, the years after, an exporter of terrorism, migration, and you know, what is considered classically in NATO, I'm not going to say soft security, but internal security. And I think that the Arab Spring should have been our first indication that this was changing because, and Abdelaziz will probably confirm this, because in 2011 we discovered that the Gulf had not only diplomatic might and power, but also military might and power, and was able and willing to deploy so to shape the region. But I really think that it's Ukraine that should make us truly wake up and understand that this is not the region that we're used to dealing with. Because, for essentially two reasons. First, the region in geopolitical terms is a bargaining area that Russia has deeply penetrated already. But don't make no mistake, it's not like Arabs are just, you know, swung by any opinion that they're the target of. I think there's also a huge legacy of our own engagement that is neutral to negative. Let me give you a few numbers. Well, first of all, you know that the UAE abstained in the Security Council resolution on Ukraine. In the General Assembly, Algeria also abstained. If you think they're both not that relevant, I invite you to rethink this. The UAE is, of course, a major air power now. Also, in general, I think a considerable military power, and so is Algeria. And so when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine, the region is decidedly undecided what to make of it. When you look at the surveys, you see that 39% of Jordanians think the invasion was completely unjustified. 39%. So that's not a majority. More importantly, 37% say they don't know. Then you have another poll saying, you know, all across the region, so not just Jordanians, but I was particularly interested in Jordan because it's, you know, Jordan is, I think, on the upper end when it comes to cooperation. When it comes across the region, 24%, the largest number, says the invasion of Ukraine is NATO's fault. 13% say it's Biden's fault. 16% say it's Russia's fault. The vast majority, 42%, say they don't know. So of those who know, the largest component says it was NATO's fault. They expanded when they shouldn't have been expanding. Of course, Russia has deployed a significant Stratcom initiative beforehand and has dominated the region in that regard. So if you're thinking, what do we care? Well, I think that, you know, if it was just this region, but we're seeing that we're losing the geopolitical battle, or we're really on the defensive when it comes to the narrative in the global south, when it comes not just to Ukraine, but I think the geopolitical contest in general. Which brings me to a harder point. If you are not worried enough yet, back in the 90s, JFC Naples did a study on what if the Soviet Union had attacked the southern flank, and came to the conclusion that it would have been significantly easier for the Soviet Union to significantly hurt us than it would have come from the eastern flank. I see an echo here because I think that we're having exactly the same conversation. I mean, I wasn't there at the time, but as during the Cold War, where the South is seen as, you know, a domestic security issue perhaps, and the real issue is in the East. But the East is in the South. So Russia has expanded its Mediterranean squadron since 2013. At any given time, you have 10 to 15 Russian vessels in the Mediterranean. It has in Tartus not just expanded its air base, its naval base, it also now has an air base in Syria. It is looking to get access to the Libyan ports. In the worst case for Russia, it wants to deny us naval supremacy, but its long-term plan is to challenge NATO's naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. And it's, of course, not alone. China and Iran are also getting into the Mediterranean. So what I invite you to do is to stop seeing this region as, you know, a backyard of Europe that needs some capacity building, or perhaps needs to be stopped from coming to Europe with bombs or with little money as terrorists and migrants, and instead consider it as a geopolitical entity in its own right that is currently courted heavily by Russia and others, and China, of course. So We should, first of all, I would like to replicate that study, actually, that James C. Naples did at the time and see where we would stand today. Of course, it would be classified. I could not tell you what the outcome is, but I would hope it's a different result. But this is the now. Russia is in for the long game, and while a lot of Russians' engagement in the Mediterranean has been belittled for not being as successful, it has engaged, developed this capability over the last 10 years and will continue to do so. And the second thing is, and this is where I'm looking at Abdelaziz, who I saw in February in Riyadh, we need to engage diplomatically. And we of course, we have a new ASG now who knows the region really well, need to understand that there needs to be a serious diplomatic outreach effort coupled with StatCom to change the conversation. And I'll end here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Florence, for your speech. I will back to you later. Now is the moment of Jan Lesser that will talk about Southern region partnerships and the Indo-Pacific issue, making strategic sense. Please.
Okay, Flavia, thank you very much indeed. Whether I'll make strategic sense of these very different regions together as a matter of the current environment, I don't know, we can see. But we're talking about a lot of different things here. Let me maybe share 3 points with you. The first one very much is the point that Florence made about the East and the South. That's quite a good way to put it. You know, there is a nexus between these two theaters. They are not entirely separate. It's true historically that the southern flank was in some ways a subordinate theater for NATO during the Cold War, even afterwards. But that's not the kind of situation we have today. Today we have a war, and the war is in the East. And that obviously shapes our thinking. But there are things that can go wrong, let me put it that way, in the South. I would not be so worried, there are people around the table who know more about this, I would not be so worried about Russia challenging, in an aeronaval sense, NATO's sort of becoming a peer competitor in any true sense in the Mediterranean. I don't think they're in a position to do that. And even in an unconventional sense, with things like the Wagner Group, we'll see that these things are also, in a way, brittle assets. But is there a potential for things to go badly wrong in the South that would be escalatory? Absolutely. And we think about the escalatory potential of what is happening today in Ukraine, and we tend to think about the Baltic or perhaps the Black Sea, and that's correct. But there are also things that can go wrong on Turkey's borders, in Syria, in Libya, in the Sahel, in the Mediterranean itself, that could be escalatory with Russia. So there is this connection. And of course, our partners in the South are stakeholders in this. There's also, as you mentioned, the longer-term question of China. And if we think about China's bearing on the European security environment, in many ways, this is first and foremost something that would be felt in the South, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of their own stake in security, which we can debate, but in terms of their long-term role, I suspect they're going to be more interesting actors in the Mediterranean in the future than they will be in Central and Eastern Europe. So, you know, that is yet another connection that we think about over the longer term. The second point I'd make is that, and this is really about, you know, allow me to comment as an American analyst, you know, making assumptions about what the United States does in the future. There is a very common assumption that over time the United States will be spending more time and reconfiguring its military posture to deal with challenges in the Indo-Pacific. And I think that's certainly true. We had a little bit of a debate about American politics earlier. Probably the only thing Republicans and Democrats agree with in Washington today is a more hawkish view about China. And this is obviously meaningful for Europe in its own debate about strategic autonomy, and NATO is a deep stakeholder in this. But there is an important question to be asked, and I think it's an uncomfortable one, and people don't often address it, and that is this transition something slow and gradual, something a decade from now, or is it something that could happen next week? If something happens, there's an incident in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait or something like this, you could suddenly, NATO could suddenly find itself in the position of having to compensate for this, not as a matter of future strategic autonomy and aspirational planning, but as something that would happen next week or next month. I don't know the answer there, but you rarely hear it put that way. Again, will NATO become a kind of military security actor in the Indo-Pacific to to answer your question. I think this is very unlikely, and it's probably not proper to put it that way. But is it a stakeholder, above all, through this question of what the United States will be doing? Absolutely. The third point I would make, the final point, is to talk about NATO's engagement in the South as a window onto something Florence has already mentioned, this broader question of relations with the global South. And Ukraine obviously has crystallized this challenge. If we were in this room 3 years ago, probably no one would use the term global South. It's there, it was out in the discourse, but now it's in every discussion. I am not, you're right to point to this, Florence, I'm not as pessimistic about differences between North and South when it comes to Ukraine or Russia or even China. I think, yes, is there ambivalence about sanctions? Is there a question in public opinion which is not so engaged in this in the South? Absolutely. But, at a fundamental level, and you look at those successive votes in the UN General Assembly, about morality, about legality, I do think we're on the same page. The question is, what do you do about it? And there are, of course, countries in the global South who would like to keep this all at arm's length, and it's understandable. But it's a much more fluid global order that everyone is talking about. And that comes to this question of what you do with the partnerships. And we could have a long conversation about that. There's a set of sort of technical things, technical operational things, that we can be engaging with in the Mediterranean dialogue and also in ICI. And there's a set that's established, and there are a set of new things that could have to do with energy transition and many other things, and broadly about connectivity. But there's also a big political task there. I mean, if we really want NATO to be a core vehicle for transatlantic debates about the big things happening in the world, you have to put some value on this southern engagement as a window into that bigger space. And I think it can certainly play that role. If you talk to partners in the South, what you hear very often are, well, two things. If you want to do more with us, tell us what your strategy is in the South. And secondly, if you want to do more with us, restart these very active high-level political dialogues which used to exist at a time when there was in fact less to talk about. So let me stop with that and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jan, for your speech. The previous speakers' issues permit us to focus with Abdulaziz Sager on the possible Gulf Cooperation Council NATO cooperation. President, can this breakthrough happen, and is it really in the making? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, good evening to everybody, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. Very special regard to my good friend, Ambassador Rizu. Thank you for your kind invitation, and I'm terribly sorry I couldn't make it to Rome to see a lot of my good friend and to see you and to be with you physically, but you know the reason. I think I deserve very little credit because originally the idea in 2002, it started with me when I put it up in a Doha conference was organized by the NATO and RAND Corporation at the Ritz Hotel in Doha. When I said we need a cooperation between the Gulf countries and the NATO. And at that time, it was very important message post September 11 and post the current situation at that time and the threat that we start facing from the neighboring country. And the situation, of course, later on that have developed in Iraq. In 2004, I was in Istanbul as a witness of the initiative. I was very happy to see everybody there, so I think it was good. Two things I did wish. I did wish Saudi Arabia would have been convinced to join at that time, but four of the Gulf countries, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE have joined the ICI. Saudi Arabia and Oman did not. I don't think they have any special serious comment about not joining the ICI. But I think if I visit the idea now and see what has been achieved with the ICI, maybe I will say they have seen that the ICI would not really provide what they really were looking for, which definitely there is a serious threat in the region. Francis, she said very well that we need to look at the geopolitical situation slightly different, and we need to look at the region and how their involvement. The region feel there is a serious threat, and with that serious threat, being it energy, maritime, terrorism, name it, sectarianism, domestic, issues. All of that still represents a serious threat in the region. And the region, they were looking for a real security guarantor. Now, we don't make any mistake by saying we do have a direct relation with key member states at NATO, including the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Spain. A lot of them, we do have a military supply equipment and so, but short of the US that have shown a serious commitment in the region, whether it's in the CENTCOM or the Fifth Fleet, the Sixth Fleet, all the commitment that the US have shown in the region. NATO did not really contribute much. I mean, you look at two things. You look at Iraq and Afghanistan. Besides the real training that has been provided, which is very much appreciated and very much liked, they did not really look at us on the region as a territorial, as an important geopolitical, and that we need to have a proper security, sort of a framework that we need to reach. The ICI does not really provide that sort of a security framework. The ICI is a menu that you can choose from. Yes, there is an academy in Kuwait. Yes, there is many ambassadors meeting that took place. Yes, there are many conferences and talk and workshop. But in reality, what the region today is looking for, this is why the region had no choice except to look east. They did not turn to the east, but they did look to the east. They did look at China as a possible partner. They did look at Russia in a way, in certain things. I was at the Munich Security Forum when I did ask Secretary Blinken at that time. I said the region is trying to maintain a balanced relation when it comes to the Russia. We condemned the Russian aggression in Ukraine. We wanted to have the unity of Ukraine. There is no compromise about that. We do not agree that using weapon or using aggression or occupying land. We did vote in the UN. We have issued many resolutions at the Gulf Cooperation Council. So we are not in support of that, but at the same time, we do not wish to be on the campaign of either or, And his answer to me was quite clear. He said, there is no balance with aggression. I think it was a clear message also from that side. But I think looking today at the Ukrainian situation, this raises different questions. We might be at the beginning or the edge of a new Cold War era. So if we are at that entry point of a Cold War era, do you need the friend that you know that they have been close to you since long time to be closer to you, or you want them to be away from you? The only reason why they look at BRICS and Shanghai and look at all these things is because they felt in the region, in the Gulf, that we have been neglected in a way. We have been marginalized in a way. We have been not giving the necessary protection that we think, although we possess the important resources for energy, and we have been very balanced when it comes to that in terms of the global economy, but at the same time, we do not get the same recognition, and the same security guarantor that we want. What I would propose today here, that we can think about it all out of the box, and this reflects my personal views, is looking at NATO Plus, which means, can we bring these Gulf countries on the NATO Plus, on the security framework, but not in the voting of accepting or non-accepting a new member? In other words, your resistance is Turkey, as an example, being a member of NATO that did not accept Finland and Sweden in the beginning. Yes, now there are some compromises, negotiation, and so Finland have been accepted, but still, we're not interested in that process of decision. What we are interested is, if you can provide the security umbrella, the guarantor for us in that one, definitely we're not going to look east. We're not going to turn totally to the east. We still would like to keep our relation to the west. This is where we had a long history relation. This is where we buy most of our weapon system. This is where our military doctrine is. This is where our good long-term economic relation is. But if we don't get that sort of thing, then don't blame the country in the Gulf if they have been rejected to be giving the weapon system they want, and they have been rejected by not providing them with the security umbrella they feel they deserve and they need it because of their global contribution to the global economy and the energy resources, then definitely they will be left with no choice except to look into alternatives. So if we can think out of the box on the NATO plus new member, on the security guarantor framework, that we can find out an acceptable means in that one, not in the process of the decision. As I said, we don't want to be in the process of decision of the NATO current member, whom to accept, whom not to accept. That's something, we have no interest in entering into that point. This is, we leave it into the European. But look at today, the same threat I have from Iran when it comes to the nuclear program, when it comes to the energy security, when it comes to the maritime security. Look at Iran's threat today by providing all the drones, all the missiles that, to the Russian, that they have been used in the Ukrainian war, that made it more complicated and pushed for a different supply. Look at into all these matters, and then you can, who's my friend, who's the one that I can rely on and accept and get, and they're closer to me, and then we can provide that one. So you need to extend that sort of security umbrella, security framework, security guarantor that is needed. We don't want to look at NATO as a political structure. Political structure, fantastic. Negotiation is a great one. I'm familiar with the NATO organization since my good friend Ambassador Rizzo did visit us in the center, and he was one of the first. We did a few major conferences in Saudi Arabia during the time of Prince Saud Al Faisal. I remember Condoleezza Rice talking to Prince Saud Al Faisal at that time, encouraging the Saudi Arabia to join the ICI. We did in UAE, we did in Qatar, we worked together in many places in the Gulf. And I think still the Gulf is valuable, important, reliable partner that can be work together with the NATO. Thank you very much for your kind invitation, and I will stop here, and I'll be more than happy, of course, to continue with you today. But great to see everybody on the screen, and sorry not to be with you.
Thank you, President, for your speech. I will be back to you later. Please stay with us. And
I will
now,
be staying with you.
now the last speaker, Aydin Kilic. We'll talk about how to counter external threats to regional partners of both Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. Please.
Thank you, Flavia. Unfortunately, we have no shortage of, I think, challenges and threats in the South, and especially I want to focus on Sahel area, because Sahel seems to be the hot point for now. And Sahel is facing that area overall, I will say, facing multidimensional challenges. And we still witness the proliferation of terror groups in this region and criminal networks. Organized crime is there. Environmental pressure, climate change is putting heavy strain on the region. And there is almost always the case of weak governance or ill governance or even ill administration, because many parts of the Sahel is run or controlled by non-state actor groups. These groups has guns and they control the area. The central government role is limited. There is no void, but not necessarily government control. And military coups are also making a comeback. And for Africa, news of military coups are not uncommon, but after the end of colonial era, according to research, between 1956 and 2001, there was 80 successful and 180 unsuccessful failed coups. This is large. And following the 2000s, basically, until 2019, the number of military coups were halved, basically. And now we see a resurgence. And we need to keep an eye on how this trend will continue. But one thing has not changed. I think the one is that all military coups almost always executed with the same reasons: corruption, mismanagement, poverty, lack of security. And this has not changed. And poverty continues to be a significant challenge for the region because 40%, over 40% of the countries or the population in this region is witnessing extreme poverty, including Niger, Burkina Faso, and climate change is also contributing to poverty. We will see more impact. Now we are seeing unpredictable weather, drought, floods, as we have witnessed in Libya, and land degradation is a significant challenge for the area. Sahara is expanding, and we will see a great deal of reduction, up to 50% of grain production, and this will also affect livestock in the area. This is a reason also for internally displaced people. We are seeing millions of people either as internally displaced or irregular migration to the north or to the south. And of course, Mediterranean dialogue countries are within the major countries of destination. And with climate change, I think we will see more migration and more challenges in this domain. Demographics, I think this is another challenge in this region because the highest rate of population rate is now we see in sub-Saharan Africa, followed by Sahara. And we will see by 2050, another billion in Africa. When this population, I think we will see another, also a youth bulge, and they will look for opportunities. They are seeking for employment, and if they fail, which is highly likely, we will see increased frustration. They will look for to go somewhere else. This will put extreme strain on the region. And migration or irregular migration is creating another problem in the region because this is creating a brain drain problem. Normally, the first ones who are able to move are people who are well-trained or capable or at least has means to travel to find another job or a living in another country or in another area. And the left behind is relatively less capable. We will see more problems, more challenges in this region. Personally, I see climate change-induced migration as the greatest challenge for the region. Of course, climate change is almost synonymous with water scarcity because we are having a problem with already fresh water, and this will create more friction, competition for the resources. And we have seen what has happened in Lake Chad region. It had significant impact in the security of the region. 11 of many countries are already among the most water-stressed countries. Food security, despite for the Gulf countries or for Middle Eastern countries, I think it's relatively fine. They are doing relatively fine. But Egypt, for example, is importing 80% of wheat. And not surprisingly, it's coming from Russia and Ukraine. Terrorism, as a NATO strategic concept defines, remains as a direct asymmetric threat to alliance in all forms and manifestations. And terrorism is contagious, and now we see that it is on the rise in Sahel, and also a comeback again, a resurgent Al-Shabaab in Horn of Africa. And fight against terrorism in the Middle East is still continuing because terrorist groups are directly targeting NATO nations in the region. And it is also, terrorism is also extremely complicated to manage because what we have seen also, for the first time, Daesh taking control of Mosul. And we have done an extreme a research on the impact on the ground because it's much more complicated. And we have investigated children recruitment by terrorist organizations and their integration back to, we have defeated the Daesh in Mosul, but integration of these kids, children, back into society is different, is extremely challenging. There is social stigma and they have, this stigma has created deep mental scars for these children. And these are our future generations in the region. I think we need to do something for these children, teenagers, and now they are grown-ups. And I want to emphasize maybe one of the most important domain is the information battle, because we are fighting an information battle in the region for the South or Middle East. And this requires also calibrated strategic communication to counter China and Russia in the South. And I believe this communication battle requires urgent attention with a clear strategy. You can easily see how Chinese and Russian propaganda and activities are impacting, because if you go and check United Nations resolutions and voting patterns, I think it's clear. And unfortunately, colonial memories of slavery is still there. It's over for us, but this is playing against our interest. And China, especially Russia, seems to be using it easily. And they are also challenging rule-based international order, because when they support, when they offer support, they put less strings attached. I wouldn't say unconditional, but this proves very challenging. And how to counter? It's really, I know, not much time. I think the key to counter is we need to build trust. And building trust is not binary. It will take time. And it is based on past experiences. And to build trust also, we need to win this information war. Without winning the information war, we are highly unlikely to win this war. And one last thing, I'm sorry I'm over time, but also we need to keep in mind the absorption capability of these countries and the region, because we were engaging with the Malian official and they were complaining because of there is a traffic jam, security traffic jam in the region, and he said there is, as far as he knows, there is 114 security initiatives, let alone counting the budget. He was not able to even count the names of these initiatives. I think we need to streamline our effort and simplify and deconflict our engagements or partnership in the South.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, for your speech. Thank you all for your speeches. Now let's start the Q&A session. I would like to ask some icebreaker questions to each of you before collecting questions from the public. Please stay within 3 minutes in your answer. My first question is for Florence Gao. How do you imagine a menu of cooperation with the countries of the southern region, and which older programs do you think are still relevant? Please.
Well, I think it's a lot harder in NATO to undo something than to create something. So I think that the existing cooperation programs, they can totally stay. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with, you know, the training courses that we have at NATO Defense College, or, you know, the capacity building courses, especially through NATO School Oberammergau. I think you can continue using them. I think one aspect that both ICI and MD always under-delivered is the strategic level. So the defense ministerials didn't happen nearly as often as I think they should. There is probably some obstacles, some diplomatic obstacles. I think if you want to engage at that level, it's not a matter of cooperation, but first you have to have a sustainable outreach initiative in diplomatic terms to convince of the utility. But again, there's probably something in the background that is stopping that. So I don't think it's for lack of trying that this hasn't happened. So I would say it's it's not so much about cooperation, it's about diplomatic engagement and dialogue. And Oana knows this better than I do, probably what's going on behind the scenes.
Thank you.
This microphone.
Okay. Yeah, Lester, expanding what you said, how do you see the southern region in the global context?
Well, you know, it's a key question. I mean, as I was trying to suggest, I think it is a window into some of these much bigger things that are going on in the international system today. I mean, it's a part of this sort of global South phenomenon, but some people talk about swing states and other sorts of things. I think, you know, many of the countries that NATO has been engaging over the years in the South are in fact critical in this debate. And that, I think, gives NATO an opportunity, but it also, you know, it's obviously also a challenge. I think that whole definition of what is the southern space that NATO is engaging has to change, and I think almost all of us have talked about this, that it can't, in my view, of course it has to be core places like North Africa and the Levant and the Gulf, but it can't just be that. I think the African space, even the South Atlantic we could talk about, you know, these are places that have a real bearing on the future of European security, and there is a kind of interdependence between what happens in those spaces and the future of Europe and also American interests in the South. I am less just a comment on the public opinion part. I think, you know, of course, it's been characterized accurately. I'm not sure it should be a driver of what we do in North-South terms. That's a very tough problem. I think if we want to identify a problem, it's not so much in public opinion, it's in the opinion of elites in the South. And it's all about this question of trust, because this issue also exists with political elites in the South. I mean, that's a more pressing and proximate problem, it seems to me, for this NATO strategy of engagement in the future.
Thank you, Jan. Mr. Sager, do you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question for you. There is a favorable opportunity for a significant linkage between the Gulf Cooperation Council and NATO. What is your assessment on the possibilities of achieving this result, and how can US election influence this relationship? Please.
Well, definitely the Gulf countries' relation to the US is slightly different from the NATO as an organization and member state, you know, with the Gulf country. As I said, NATO for us, it's not a supplement, it's not an alternative to our relation to some of the NATO member country like the United States. But maybe what we need to consider, because we're still of the opinion that NATO member states are not always in the same views when it comes to our regional security, because of their awareness, their interest, their relations. So they don't have a similar opinion, all of them, when it comes to the regional, like the Gulf, in terms of the decision and so. If we want to move further, we have to provide a different mechanism. As I said, a real security guarantor. This is what the Gulf are looking for. Yes, as Francis said, we can keep the training course, we can keep the ambassadors meeting, we can keep the conference and get together on process, but that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for really as a sort of a guarantor on the threat that they have, and I did mention it, which is terrorism, viruses, energy, nuclear, drones, all these sort of things. And we need to go back also to the current situation on Ukraine-Russia crisis. Where do you need your friends to be? And I think, in principle, as I said, there is much more in common between the Gulf countries and the NATO member state than what we have with Russia. Russia, as Henry Kissinger said, they're a producer of a raw material, and we are a producer of a raw material. They have oil and gas, and they have some minerals. We do have oil and gas and minerals, so they're not added value. And after their the deficiency of their military equipment, I don't think they will be the source to rely on the future. But still, China is there, and also we have not moved with the Chinese to a strategic defense and security relation. Still, it's a buyer and seller. But if the Gulf countries see that there's nobody responding to their need, then they're going to look for alternative and they're going to move. So what we need to do is to make sure that we bring the dialogue into much more concrete level, a much more effective level that we need between both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay with us. Last question for Aydin Kilic. What are the probable focus subjects of the S.p.A mission in the fast-changing environment, for example, Maghreb and Sahel, please?
Personally, I don't expect a significant change. Our mandate requires us to align our work with NATO action plans and work strands, and our mission is really there, and it's simple but not easy. Our mission is to understand, improve situational awareness, identify threats and challenges emanating from the South. Seemingly simple, but really, and to do that, what we are trying to achieve is bringing local perspective. That is the reason we have very good network, very good relations and engagement in the South. We are doing our part in terms of academic research engagement with the Western experts, but we are talking and coming together with also regional international organization offices and entities like ACSRT, Africa Center for Research and Study on Terrorism. We have very good links, and we have recently released a paper, worked on a paper on Horn of Africa, regional cooperation and multidimensional security. This is key. We are also working with ICI Regional Center in Kuwait. We have cooperated on energy security. And I believe, especially following the Vilnius summit, there is a clear tasking, which is comprehensive and deep reflection on the South, and I think HUB has the expertise and capability to support, and we are willing to do that. We are already working to support this tasking, and we will continue to focus on existing threats and challenges, also look for opportunities for cooperation, which is also really challenging. Seemingly simple, but finding actionable cooperating items or areas for cooperation is really challenging. And this is an area that I believe HUB will continue to focus.
Thank you. Thank you. Now is the moment of the questions from the public. I would ask you to pose questions to our guests and not statements, please. Please raise your hand, tell us your name, organization, and to whom you want to ask a question. Are there questions? Please. Okay, please.
Possibile.
Test. Thank you very much. I'm Raffaele Mastrarocco from I'm a PhD researcher at the European University Institute. Thank you very much for all the interventions. It's a very interesting panel. My point is related to, well, my question is related to Ian Lester's intervention, and more specifically about the question about partnerships. But my question is open for all the speakers. There's a lot of discussions about how global order is changing and how much it is much more fluid, and how NATO can project security in such an order. But at the same time, we're also talking about a world that is very much institutionalized and multilateral. So my question is, can NATO make use of this multilateral and institutional world to project security in the South and perhaps tackling common challenges such as climate change? Or to put it differently, what are the prospects of interinstitutional cooperation between NATO and the other regional security organizations in the South? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think, especially at a time of war, in a sense, in the space of NATO's core business in Europe, it's very difficult to kind of construct new missions for NATO in new spaces. I mean, I'm a little skeptical about that. But I do include the Mediterranean environment as part of this European security space. But I think if you want to do more, and especially to extend the partnerships to very relevant areas in Africa and elsewhere, even in Latin America, which we didn't really speak about, I think the kinds of partnerships that you're mentioning could actually be quite critical, including, I would say, even with the European Union, or with the African Union. There are a number of different possibilities for this. Just to say a word about the EU-NATO piece, I think if there is going to be a place where the EU and NATO, in a sense, work most effectively together, it's likely to be in the South, where you have this mix of the conventional and the unconventional in security terms, where the EU has instruments NATO doesn't, and vice versa. So I think this can absolutely be part of the strategy, not just the bilateral or multi-bilateral, but the actual engagement with other organizations. So thank you for the question.
Question there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wish to thank the panelists for their insightful interventions. My name is Giulio Pascuzzi and I'm a journalist for Air Press. I noticed that China was mentioned several times during your speeches, as well as the importance to take into account the Indo-Pacific dynamics when elaborating NATO's strategic posture. China and Russia are increasingly influent in the southern region, especially in some MENA and African countries. That should never be overlooked. Thus, how could we engage with those nations more exposed to this kind of influence? Mr. Sagar mentioned bringing Gulf countries within the NATO plus security framework, so I was wondering whether that was feasible. Thank you.
Who wants to answer? President, please. Do you want to answer?
Oh, no, he's frozen.
President Sagar, do you want to answer to this question?
No, I think it's a right question, but I think we should be looking for somebody from the NATO side who can respond to my issues, because I was the one who said maybe we need to look at a security framework that can provide a security guarantee for the Gulf countries. Is that acceptable, non-acceptable? Is NATO can consider something like this? Do we need to have a serious debate about it? What are the conditionality? What's required from both sides? What sort of level of guarantee? I mean, the European now, they are entering into an air defense agreement, many of those countries, maybe except France and Italy, did not endorse it yet, but there is this negotiation of the air defense agreement in Europe also. So maybe, we need somebody from the defense side, from the defense side of the NATO, to elaborate in that. But if there's nobody now, maybe in the, we will take it up, with them through the different, channel and see how do they feel about an idea like this. Maybe in the next meeting we can have a much more serious discussion and detailed discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe Aydin Kilic wants to add something.
For sure, I'm not representing NATO. I'm from NATO. This is not an official NATO position, but I think I want to also touch to the previous question, because I think these are linked for me, because even the European Union and NATO, despite majority of members of NATO is a member of also European Union. It's not straightforward and easy for a security organization. And it's always challenging because then comes, especially for the South, because we are working specifically focusing on the South. The challenge what we see in the South is there is G5 Sahel, Africa Union. Africa Union is not European Union because the name is similar but far from European Union. Or there is Sahel Alliance, an initiative, security initiative. There is also regional economic organization, ECOWAS, SATSI, Horn of Africa Council, which is probably dead before birth. And this is always challenging to find an interlocutor to work together. This is, NATO is an alliance of, for now, 31 nation, and it has its own challenges, and then coming to a common ground, finding a common ground within the region with this many organizations will be challenging, I believe.
Okay, we have a Zoom question for Florence Gaub. What may be the main axis for a strategic communication campaign in the MENA region to recover the initiative? Please.
So I'm going to say something that might ruffle a few feathers, but bear with me. At the beginning of the war, I was in Morocco, and I asked my surf coach, who's the Moroccan surf champion, by the way, what do you think of the war in Ukraine? And she said to me, I don't see how it's so different from Iraq. And I told people back home in Brussels at the time that, and they got quite upset with me, even though I'm just relaying the message. This is the elephant in the room. We cannot, as Westerners, come to the region and tell them about the rules-based international order without acknowledging the fact that several of our allies broke the order back in 2003 with an intervention that was clearly not within the lines of international law. So I'm not saying that to go back in history and debate the reasons for this intervention, whether it was right or wrong, but we have to talk about it because the people in the region remember it until today. And they think, at first glance, it looks pretty much identical to them, a big country attacking a country saying, I don't like your government, I'm going to just remove it. So that is one of the big taboos in this conversation that I think we've been skirting around. So we cannot credibly talk about rules-based international order in the region unless we want to have that Iraq conversation. So if you don't want to have that Iraq conversation, which I think is quite difficult, you should definitely appeal to the fact that what Russia is doing is imperialistic, which is one of the nerval points for people in the region. Obviously, they don't like that, as many of them being victims of colonialism in the past. I would also say, let Ukraine do the talking. I was at a conference the other day and saw a project funded by the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. It's called Immersive War. You put a virtual headset on and you see the war with your own eyes, so to speak. I mean, don't worry, it's not gory, but it is an immersive experience. It does something to you that just seeing pictures on the TV doesn't do it. And they told me that they had been to Jordan, where a conventional outreach campaign had not had the desired effects on the public, but these VR sets did. But did have more of an emotional impact. Again, especially for people in the region who live much closer, who have a much closer experience with war than most of us do. Which brings me to my last point on I think also what Ian said about the distinction between elites and public. I think that distinction is no longer as pronounced as it used to be, precisely because of the Arab Spring. So of course, these aren't most of them are not democracies, but if there's one thing these governments have learned, is that the street, the people, when they really don't like something, they can remove you very quickly. So they are in tune with what the public thinks. And this is something we've had actually for a while as a problem as NATO, because while behind closed doors, they're very happy to cooperate with us, they don't really like to be seen with us in public. So I think that's something we just have to acknowledge. So if you want to convince the elites to play with you, you also to some extent have to convince, I think, the public. I think that's...
Thank you, Florence. Other questions from the... Oh, please.
Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. My name is Stefano Marcuzzi. I'm a researcher at the Italian National Defense University here in Rome, the Cast. Thank you very much indeed for your presentations. I have a question for our director, Kilic, and I fully share your point about the continued relevance of terrorism in the South, and particularly regarding the phenomenon that I call Africanization and hybridization of jihad in terms of leadership as well as narrative and tactics. For example, what some groups do, they try to penetrate the local communities, for example, through marriages, in order to be fully accepted, and then change the local culture, the culture of the tribes from within. So what kind of engagement can we realistically have without putting boots on the ground, of course? Thank you.
Boots on the ground is, I don't know really, I don't see it as realistic, but what we can do is, this is a topic for defense capacity building. Again, it's also a challenge, because in the end you need to train a lot of people for a long time, because this doesn't happen overnight. I think this is the best we can do. But in terms of terrorism, I think there's a contagion. We can see clearly, if you plot the events, what's going on in recent years, there is clearly a contagion of terrorism in the region. And also this is not like exactly Mosul, but there are many ungoverned, or as I say before, ill-governed areas, governed by non-state actor groups. And now we see even different kinds of terrorism or TTPs, like kidnapping. Kidnapping is on the rise. This is a different kind of fundraising for terrorist groups. I think we need to be agile enough to react and adapt. Otherwise, I don't see an easy and clear answer.
So, thank you all for your questions. We have other questions, Zoom questions. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but we ran out the time and we must close the session. Thank you all for the discussion. Florence Gaup, Jan Lesser, thank you. Abdulaziz Sagar, thank you, bye-bye. Audin Kilic, thank you. Now I leave the floor to Ambassador Giulio Terzi di Sant'Agata, President of the Senate Committee on European Union Policies, for his closing remarks. Please, Ambassador. Yes? Aiuto,
and also to thank Abdulaziz Sagar, who is connected with us from Jeddah. I thank him for his time. And now, of course, the floor to close our session goes to a very important diplomat and also a good friend, Giulio Terzi, a person who can conclude this session because he has such a wide experience in terms of policy, in terms of security, in terms of general affairs, a real diplomat in the sense of being able to cover with a large view what is before us. So, Giulio, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished guests, and all of you. I think that Ambassador dear friend Sandro Minutorizzo is talking about somebody else, not myself, with his words. Maybe are you sure that you're talking about your friend Giulio? In any case, thank you so much. I'm only sorry not having been able to stay here the whole day, but I learned a lot and was very much interested in listening to remarks, question and answer, and also presentation that I heard. And it is very important. I came here with the idea to underline the importance of cohesion, solidarity, and necessity of sticking together among NATO partners, NATO Euro-Atlantic institutions, among NATO nations especially. But the more I'm listening to this intervention this afternoon, the more I'm convinced, or I've always been convinced, but even more now, of the great importance of the wide array of partnership which exists between NATO and countries which are not, stricto sensu, member of the Atlantic Alliance. It is our organization, NATO, the NATO Alliance, is a security organization which has a global mission nowadays, even more so because we know what is happening. I don't want to dwell because this has not been was spoken about it at NATO Vilnius summit and many other instances, G7, but especially in all NATO instances about the war of aggression against Ukraine. But I would like just to reserve a few remarks about a key element of the situation that we are facing, or the major challenge that we are facing today, which is certainly a military and security challenge, but is an eminently political challenge, and even more so is a challenge of keeping our nation's public opinions, electorates in a way, but let's talk about public opinions and our people engaged in going on, in being together and in facing all the multiple crises that we have in front of us. And these multiple crises tend to generate, as long as the time goes, discomfort. They are in contradiction with the need of resilience and deterrence that we feel. And therefore, when we address the question of how the time affects our resilience, the resilience of our people, and the problems that our people have to suffer because of the security situation, we go straight in the realm of communication strategy against disinformation. I noticed the question about communication strategy which was asked and the important answer which was given. But I think that this question of disinformation came up quite vividly in the NATO Vilnius summit, and which was quite straightforward on this issue. We will continue to address disinformation and misinformation, including through positive and effective strategic communications. Because deterrence cannot be, and these are my words, I just quoted this sentence, but there is no doubt that deterrence cannot be achieved solely by military means. It is eminently a combination of political action, economic decision, communication strategy, and constant attention to universal human rights, legality, the rule of law. When it comes to disinformation, we see how Beijing and Moscow have been applying the same bullet points to a common narrative designed to conduct their hybrid war against the rule-based international order. For instance, just a few days ago, the US State Department published a report entitled "How the People's Republic of China Seeks to Reshape the Global Information Environment." The report provides undisputable evidence of an ongoing effort by Beijing to create a community of digital authoritarians waging an undeclared information war. So that was the definition of this report. And it couldn't be clearer, the US State Department report. And I quote again, unchecked, the People's Republic of China effort will reshape the global information landscape, creating biases and gaps that could even lead nations to make decisions that subordinate their economic and security interests in Beijing. So it's a question of platforms, and I'm mentioning China in a NATO context because there is a coordinated, if not, and when not coordinated, and objectively very similar and identical strategy in widespreading misinformation and disinformation among our member states. And I think there is also some lessons which are clearly indicated by some friends of ours, the European Council on Foreign Relations in Rome, when they wrote a report, the S.p.A, a report on democratic defense, how Italy can lead the fight against Russian disinformation. And I'm quoting the report, the last decade has seen a rise in hybrid tactics deployed by Russia and other players, such as China. Such tactics include the use and abuse of information as part of the pursuit of broader strategic aims. And with next elections to the European Parliament, influencing opinion in countries such as Italy could prove an attractive strategy for foreign powers. This is the reason why I share this report, the S.p.A suggestion. And the suggestion is, and I quote, Italy should seize opportunities to strengthen, Italy refers to Italy, but it is also to all our countries, whenever we face this wave of misinformation. We should seize the opportunities to strengthen the battle against disinformation, such as encouraging the next European Commission, coming out from the next European Parliament, to incorporate this task into its mandate, and planning this topic in the agenda of Rome's forthcoming meeting, G7 meeting. The G7, this is another element that's going to be very important, because the G7 in the past had already taken a clear position over the last at least couple of summits in G7, and we have to continue and intensify this action. Furthermore, and here just a question of factual references. A very interesting and important meta report to the European Commission on the period between June the 30th, 2023. That report recorded about 410,000 ads about social issues, elections or politics on Facebook and Instagram that had to be removed for failing to comply with meta policy, in particular in respect of transparency rule. And, believe it or not, who was at the top? Which country was at the top of this number, huge number of ads generated, maybe the trolls, maybe by foreign countries or other, or domestic also actors, but they had to be removed. The country which was on the top of the pyramid was Italy, unfortunately. And then 65,000 posts, 50,000 for Germany, 43,000 in Spain, 42,000 in France. And the press has been commenting the outcome of the election in Slovakia. And here again, a report by the European Commission shows that engagement, and I'm quoting, the engagement with Kremlin-aligned content since the war began jumped nearly 90% on YouTube and more than doubled on TikTok. Online platforms have supercharged Kremlin's ability to wage information war and thereby cause new risks for public safety. Posts in Slovakia that were in violation of platform policies had been seen at least 530,000 times in the 2 weeks after the Digital Service Act went into effect. People in Slovakia have bigger problems than Ukraine, was said by a candidate to the prime ministership. And when his political party and other appeasers fails to see is, I'm afraid, the fact that problems would be much, much bigger if we don't push back decisively. The attack on democracy and the attempt by Russia and China to rewrite and reshape the international order at their image. That's why I'm fully convinced, I'm sure that around this table, this conviction, this opinion is shared. We need to stand by our commitment to deter and avert future hybrid aggressions. It is really time to resort to alert and knowledgeable citizenry that President Eisenhower mentioned in his 1961 farewell speech. Thank you. Poco diplomatico. Dove? Okay.
Grazie Giulio. Thank you very much for your intervention. I think the right way of concluding this day on the priorities of the Atlantic Alliance. I think we are come at the end of the day. It has been very dense because we had to tackle a number of questions in a very restricted time for it is always like this in the end. So we have to be happy to have been able to discuss important issues. Of course, none of them is exhausted completely because they are too big, too important. But this is, I think, probably the best we can do. I mean, the best we can do with the time available, with the resources available. So I thank you very much, especially the speakers, the moderators, the public, especially my staff who are very good, to say the minimum. E buona serata a tutti.